Hello. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to run Spark on your local computer. So first, I'm going to do a brief install. It's not going to be complete every step, but I'm going to point you through the steps in installing Spark. And second, I'm going to show you how to then use that Spark installation from PyCharm. So first, I'm going to walk through installing Spark into Windows. There's a variety of ways to do it, but I found this to be the simplest, is create a Conda environment for Spark in Windows. Additionally, I'll show you how to create a Spark installation into WSL2 Windows System for Linux for Windows. These steps in general also work for, in their overview, for installation on a Mac. So generally you'll install the Spark in some place on Linux, like I have here for WSL2, or onto your Mac. And then you'll reference that installation from PyCharm. So I'll show how to reference that installation or configure an interpreter from PyCharm. And then I'll also show how to reference an installation that's a Linux version of it, not a Windows version of it, from PyCharm. And this is common because in the end you'll want to run the PyCharm and run an interpreter that's in Windows, or often I run it in WSL2. So first, let's go through the overview of the steps for installing Spark with Python. So the idea is you're setting up an interpreter. It's a Python interpreter that simply references the Spark libraries, and that's how all of these installations work for PySpark. So what's going on here? First, you can install some version of Anaconda or Conda, and if you've already installed Anaconda, just use it. But I prefer to install Miniconda, which it just is the same thing but fewer files. And then you have to, if you want to use a package, you have to download it, as opposed to have them already installed. Second, you'll install Spark itself. There's a variety of versions. I just download the newest version and install it. And then you tell Python where the install of Spark is, and then it runs. The common problems I see are improper environment variables, and there's a few that really get messed up, in particular Java. If your Java home is incorrect, then things will not work. And it'll work one day and then not the next, and that will be because you installed Java, and then you updated it. You update Java, but you don't update the Java home, and then that'll definitely make it fail. And then Python requires a module called PySpark, and if your version of that is different from your Spark version, then this thing will fail. Sometimes it'll work partly and then fail, but you always want to have the PySpark version equal to identically the Spark version that you're installing. So you just want to make sure your environment variables are correct and that you're installing the proper PySpark module. And the solution to all of this is use Miniconda in its environments, and then you can have multiple versions of everything. That's really what you want. So Miniconda is Anaconda, but the mini version of it. There's an install guide. Just Google around. I'm not going to go through all the steps, but download and install Miniconda. You can install Anaconda if you want. Everything will work identically. Just takes you longer. All right, so once you install Conda, then you can do an environment list, like Conda env list. It works the same in Windows as it does in Linux. And by Linux, you can also think about, if you've got a Mac, the background terminal is going to be some version of Unix. So these commands also work. And I've got a few installs in both places, but I'll walk you through doing a new install of an environment. Okay, next up, after you install Conda, then you're going to install Spark. I mean, you can do it in either order, but there's some guides here I think are pretty good. I recommend you look through them and read through them in detail. There's some little tricks sometimes to look for. Just be aware of the version of Spark and Java that you're using. It's very important that you specify Spark home, and you can read about how to set the environment variables. I'm going to slide on that. One minor issue is it sort of depends on how you're using it, but it can be the case on a Windows computer that you need to install this hadoop and you can put it in a separate folder, and I add that Hadoop Hadoop home to my environment variables and specify the Hadoop folder for that home. And then within the bin, you're going to need to have when utils. And actually, you can also put it in your Spark home bin file for binary files and put when utils.exe there as well. So you're going to want to have when utils for sure, and then secondarily, depending on what you're doing, you might have to have hadoop.dll. And I just set it up so I have a Spark, so I have a Spark home and Hadoop home, and then I have Hadoop Hadoop home, and then I have files in the Hadoop home bin, including this hadoop.dll. All right, so there's a number of guides here. They don't always reference this Hadoop. If you're working with some HDFS, then you're going to want to use the hadoop.dll. And you're always going to want to have the WinUtils on a Windows computer. More about this deal. So I make a separate folder for Hadoop, and I put in just these two files. You can download it from this website here. And you'll once you go to GitHub, you can see the files there that need to be downloaded. So you put WinUtils into some binary, and if that's all you need, you can put it in spark.bin, the Spark home/bin folder. But if you're also using Hadoop, then you'll make a Hadoop folder as I did. You'll have a binary, and then within it, put hadoop.dll and winutils.exe. Okay, read about environment variables here. They can be a little bit tricky on these different kinds of computers. I just note on some sort of Linux computer, you often have, or Unix, you can have this .bash, which can set some environment variables. It's your home directory .bash rc for run commands, and then also your .profile. So look at both of those because you might be confused, and one is set one variable and the other one sets another variable. So just look at both of those. On a Windows computer, you can open up the environment variables, and here I have my Hadoop home, as I mentioned before. I've got it in some folder, and then I just got a bin file there in winutils and hadoop.dll. I've also got my Java home, and every time I download the new version of Java, I change this because otherwise everything breaks. And I've got a Spark home, and it has a path to not the bin, but it's just the folder where everything's installed. That's true of Hadoop too. It's not the bin folder that's the in the path. It's simply the root folder of your install for Hadoop or Spark home. The most important is the Spark home and this Java home, and the Hadoop home can depend on your usage of Hadoop file system. So just a reminder over here, recently I previously had 3.4.1 installed, and then I had 3.5.1 installed, and I didn't update the path. And if you delete the old one, then everything breaks. So it's super important to upload your, update your Java home. Okay, I mostly work with Windows System for Linux, WSL2, the newer version of it, and just some tips. If you're not real familiar with Unix-like commands, I went ahead and installed, different versions of my Spark. I put it in opt/opt and have installed. And then rather than mess around with changing the path every time, I just have a Spark symbolic link to one of these. And you can do the command ln for link -s for symbolic, and then your newest install, and then give it the name Spark. And that way, if your Spark home is set properly in your Linux, your WSL2, then everything works. Okay, once you've installed Conda, once you've installed Apache Spark, now you configure PySpark. And the way this works is you'll do, well, there's a variety of ways, of course, to do all these things, but this is an easy way to do it. I'm going to make an environment called py3sp3 or something similar. In a moment here, I'm going to do py3sp33. So you create an environment, and this gives you a interpreter for Python. And when you do the creation, you typically want to specify what version of Python you want. I mean, now there's 3.12. I'm just going to do 3.8 here. So whatever version you want, I'm a little bit more conservative and do versions that have been around for a little bit. So here's 3.8. And then I'm going to switch to that, and this is just some commands that you have in Conda. I'm going to switch to that interpreter. It's called activate. And then I'm going to install into that interpreter. And you can use conda install and pip install, but sometimes things don't easily work with conda install, so I use pip, and in this case, I'm just going to show you the easiest ways. So I'm doing pip install PySpark, and then this is the big deal here. This version, where you in pip install for Python, you have equals in the version. And this version must equal the version of Spark you've installed. So if you installed 3.2 or 3.5 or whatever version you have, this PySpark must double equal that version. If it doesn't, then you're on your own. Good luck. It'll probably break. It's always very frustrating. So just make sure that these two versions are exactly equal without any variation. All right, then after that, you can install whatever you want. I may install Google, BigQuery and scikit-learn and all of that stuff. You don't have to. I'm not going to demo that, but if you wanted to, once you've activated this particular environment, then you can install whatever you want into it. Also, if you're using PyCharm, it knows how to install into this Conda environment. If you get this error, which I did, and it's happened a number of times, then you can go to Stack Overflow, but essentially you copy in these lib crypto and lib SSL from the bin directory to the DLL directory in your Conda installation. So, look for that error if you have some troubles especially on Windows computers. All right, once you've created your new Python interpreter, let's see if it works. It's going to be a PySpark interpreter. I've already activated it, but just to remind you, and then I can open up that interpreter by typing Python, just Python, that's all you need. And then I'll just copy in some lines here. From blah, 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 Spark equals blah, 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 put out the version. And here's the version on the left for Windows, I think. And yeah, and the one on the right is for WSL2 for Linux. So, and same thing here, just a larger view of it. You can see that it's working. So this is just a command line test to check, yes, I've got an interpreter. It seems to be working, works the way I want. Some things that may not happen to beginners, but if you're using UDFs, user-defined functions, then the way it works is that Spark will initiate a new Python process, and it can be confused when it does so. And unfortunately, some of the times it will start up a Python 3 process, not a Python process, and then it fails because there's no Python 3. So what you can do in Conda is simply take the python.exe and copy it to be called python3.exe. Same file. You just go to your Python installation. You'll find it in your Conda's environment and the name of your environment. And there you'll look under bin, and there's a Python exe, and you copy it and give it a new name, Python 3. I always do that because I know it'll probably fail on a Windows computer. Doesn't seem to have that issue with the Linux computer. Our next step, once I've got that set up, I've made sure that my Python interpreter works with PySpark. Then I want to configure PyCharm, which I use, and the configuration for VS Code is probably similar. I haven't done it, but I'm sure it's the same sort of idea that you're setting up your interpreter so that it points to your install. And your install of Windows, your install of WSL2, or similar on the Mac. All right, so the way it works is I'm assuming that if you installed the PySpark Python and it works in Conda, I'm going to open up PyCharm, I'm going to configure the interpreter, and also point out some issues with WSL2 if you want to use that as your interpreter. So there's a number of ways to access file setting project Python interpreter, or the gear if you already have your project open. You can then add a new environment. There's two things to be aware of here that I'm going to look at: Conda environment and WSL environment. The Conda environment is going to be set up for Windows. I'm running PyCharm on a Windows computer. So then I just select my install of my environment. In my case, it's Miniconda environments, the name I gave it, py3, and then I select the actual exe for the interpreter. Notice that I've got the existing environment and I make available to other projects, and I'm filling out this the interpreter path. That's what you see in the pop-up. Once that goes, then you can, click on the button at the bottom of my PyCharm to make Python interpreter start, and the interpreter will start up, and you can type in, which I do just to check that it's working. I do my from, I create a session, I print out the version. It works for me. But sometimes I want to point out, you get this sort of error, and there's two common errors. This one here, and you've got the wrong PySpark version for your version of Spark, the Java file. So those have to be the same, as I mentioned before. And the other thing is, it'll say something like path not found if you don't have your Java home set up properly. So those are two issues that pop up here. So make sure your Spark home is where it's supposed to go. And, on Windows computer, if you change your environment variable, you want to exit PyCharm and open it up again so that it'll catch the newest environment variables. And then just make sure, as I said a number of times, this PySpark version, when you do your install into Conda environment, it exactly matches. If you mess it up, just go delete the environment. It's like, you can look at a cheat sheet for Conda, but it's Conda environment, remove, -- name, and then the name of your environment. Okay, what's up? So just, these environment variables are very important. Make sure you got the Spark home correct. Make sure Java home is correct, especially if you've updated your Java. Super important. And then if you have WSL2, you might need to have this PySpark Python path environment variable. It's not typically necessary, but I've noticed that at least PyCharm needs to have this set properly. So that's when you're going to use this WSL2 environment on a Windows computer. So let's go ahead and do it. So I assume that you've installed WSL2. There's lots of good guides on how to do it. Once you've installed WSL2, which I highly recommend, then you do your new interpreter, which you see the previous part of this presentation. And instead of Conda environment, now we're down here at WSL2. And there you can also look at JetBrains, and they have some ideas, description how to do it. So if you got more than one Linux distribution, you just select it. I've got one going right now. And then your path to in your interpreter, it's important you put your, essentially like your exe, but of course for Windows or Linux, it's not an exe, it's just the binary. So it's in my case, on most of this Windows, Linux, it's going to be home, your username, .conda environments, and then the name of your Conda environment, and then bin, and then Python. And once you do all of that, which I've selected here in this pop-up, then you run it in your interpreter, and it'll run that WSL2 interpreter inside PyCharm. Just a note about it, if you go to your console settings, so this is the settings in PyCharm, and you can always just type in here, console, and it'll pop up in the list. There, you'll see environment variables, and you might have to specify the path to your interpreter. So mine set my environment variable, and there's a pop-up here to do the environment variable. Just click on it, or you can type it out if you want, but either way, PySpark _ Python, then equals, and then I put the path to my Python interpreter program, which is home, user ID.conda environments, and then the name of my environment /bin Python. Okay, if you're not using UDFs, typically this won't be an issue, but if you are, then, and most people do, then this can be an issue, so I recommend you add that environment variable. Okay, let's see if we can make it work, because there's a lot of little issues here, and often things don't work out the way you'd like them to. So let's give it a try. Okay, first up, we talked about Miniconda, so let's just talk a little bit about it. I'm not going to go through every single step on these, otherwise it's going to take quite a long time to go through it. But here's Windows, and I can say I've installed Miniconda, and I can say Conda activate base or something like that, just to see that it's working. And then I can type Conda environments list to see what I've got. And I've already got a few because I've been using this, and I actually have a PySpark 3, but I'm going to do sort of a newer version of it. Okay, my mouse pointer's not working great, but okay, here we go. All right, so what I can do then is go ahead and create a new environment. Let me go ahead and create my environment. I'm going to say Conda create dash name py3 for Python 3 sp33 because I've got version 3.3. You can name it whatever you want, and I'm going to use Python 3.8. So I'm going to create that in Conda environment. While that's going, I'm going to show you the same thing here in WSL2. So I'm going to do the same thing, Conda activate base, just so you can see that I've got that. And then Conda create environment. It's going to be Python 3, Spark 3.3, Python equals 3.8. So this one here, now you're looking at Windows. I'm saying yes, do it. The WSL2 is taking a little bit. Okay, my Windows completed, so you can see here what they tell you to do. Conda activate the environment that you just created. So I'm going to activate that environment. And I'm going to the WSL2. I'm just doing the same thing. You'll see it's exactly the same. So Conda activate. And then we can work with that. So what should we do? We can say pip install PySpark equals 3.3.1. And I also do PyArrow for whatever reason. You don't have to. Just so I'm going to go ahead and install PySpark 3.3.1. That's on Linux. I'm going to do the same here. Pip install PySpark. And just point out that we can see that we're in the right interpreter. That's super important. So, okay, so hopefully that goes. And once that installs, I got a typo. Once that installs, you can install a bunch of other stuff, but this is the key parts. You can install pip install Google Cloud BigQuery or scikit-learn or whatever else you wanted to install. Spark NLP, something like that. Okay. So they look like they worked. All right, so what's up next? Okay, so I guess from Windows, we'll do it first. We'll go ahead and type in Python. We're going to test our interpreter to see if it works. Go ahead and paste in our command, and it failed. So it looks like we didn't get the PySpark installed properly. Let's look at my other one. Same thing in WSL. And this one works, so I'm going to continue on with this, and I'll go back to the other one in just a moment. I probably have some sort of typo. So all I'm doing is some simple commands here in PySpark just to see whether everything works. And sure enough, it works. So that's super duper. So we're good. Okay. That's WSL2. Now here in this one, this is good to see. I've got some sort of error. Okay, it appears I had a problem with my Conda installation. I did a Conda clean install. I'm sorry, Conda clean all, and that removed some of the packages that were laying around. And then let's go ahead and try this again. We'll recreate the Python environment with version 3.8. And then after that, we'll do as we did before by activating it and installing PySpark. So let's go ahead and activate it. And then we'll do a pip install PySpark. And just because I like to do it, I do the arrow. And then let's see if this will work by running a Spark session. Okay, this time I don't get the weird error that said it didn't activate and load some libraries properly. So that Conda clean -- seemed to work. And let's go ahead now and see if this environment's going to work properly with just an example of creating a Spark session. I think I'll go ahead and leave that error in this video so that you can see if you had something similar. Just do Conda space clean space dash all. Okay, sure enough, it works. Minus a little bug, but okay. Just want to remind you once again that you may need to copy python.exe to the same folder, python.exe3, if you're using UDFs on Windows. Here I am in the install on Windows of my environment, Conda environment, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy python3.exe. This should make my UDFs work in case it gets a bit confused. Next up, we install Spark. So simply download Spark and put it in a folder. I've got this version 3.3 here. And it may be hard to see, but I just simply installed it in a folder, and I make sure my environment variable points to it. If I'm only using Spark, I can make sure WinUtils is here, but if I'm going to use Hadoop, then I'll probably have a separate directory, which I do here. The bin directory includes hadoop.dll and the WinUtils. So that's my install for Spark. Next, I want to make sure that I can access this interpreter from PyCharm. So let me load up PyCharm, and I can go to the interpreter file settings. And there I can reference one of the two interpreters I just installed. One would be the one in Windows. The other would be the one in WSL. So I'll go to Add, and I'll select Conda environment, and I'll look at existing environment. And there I'll select the install, and I guess I've already done this before, but it's environments, make visible to all, projects. And you can use the .. to select your folder. And I've already selected it for Windows, so I'm going to go ahead and choose OK and OK. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but once it gets going, you can do your console, which for me is down here. I'll select my Python console, and it should load up my Windows version. And now I can go ahead and paste in some of the commands to check to see if it's going to work. So these are the same commands I pasted into the console, but now they're just running from PyCharm, so it all seems to work. The other one I can use as a interpreter is the one in WSL, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to WSL and select the interpreter, which for my computer is under WSL, and then I've got my home, my ID, my environments, and the one that I just recently created, which should be Python 3. There it is. Okay, so once I've selected it, then it should work. I didn't select the interpreter, that's why I got the error message, so make sure I select the interpreter. So let's go grab that. Python exe. Okay, there's no exe for Linux. It's selected. Now let's go and run this console. And this time, instead of the console for Windows, it'll be the console for WSL2. Takes a moment to get started. Okay, it's started. Okay, it all worked. Perfect. I'll just mention if you're using WSL2, then sometimes you should set this environment variable here. And you can look at the slides, but or the previous part of this video, where you're going to set Python going to set PySpark _ Python to be the folder where you installed your Python. Well, I can see where I installed it. I'm just going to grab the path here. And I can put it in the environment variable here. I've got my PySpark Python set properly. Now you don't need that if you're running in Windows, and so don't get confused and run Windows with a path in your environment variable set to something in WSL2. So if I'm running in if I'm running in Windows, I'm going to remove this PySpark Python path. Okay, I think that covers it. So I demonstrated how to create a Conda environment for Conda Spark environment in Windows, also a Conda Spark environment in WSL2 on Windows. If you look at some of the ways in which that was installed, that would be very similar for installing it on a Mac, in the sense that they're both Linux computers or Unix computers. I also configured PyCharm to point to a Windows interpreter and also a WSL2 interpreter. So now you should be able to run your applications in PyCharm in either Linux or in Windows, and you could also run them in the regular terminal in Windows, although I wouldn't bother with that. All right, so I hope it works for you. Good luck.